Hi, welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. I'm Laura Dodd, the head book buyer for FP, and today I'm joined by the wonderful Laura Bates to talk about Sisters of Sword and Shadow. So, hi, welcome to FP Towers.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And what do you think
Ta-da!
of the wall?
I love it.
The wall of
It's
books.
quite overwhelming seeing it like that. It's amazing.
It's
Very
it's
exciting.
an absolutely stunning cover. So let's start there. Like, what can you tell us about the beautiful kind of cover design and kind of input that you had with that?
So the cover is a kind of collaboration between Sean, who's the in-house designer at S&S, and the incredible Michaela Alcano, who is a huge hero of mine. Her covers are just stunning. So when I heard that she was designing the cover for this book, I was completely thrilled and blown away. And I really had no input at all, except for the fact that obviously it's based on my character, but it was one of those designs where you received it and just said it's perfect, don't change a thing. It's just yes, I fell in love with it immediately.
It is stunning, and I know we were talking about it off camera, but you have got this outfit.
I have, yes, already ready to go for the book launch and potentially for some of the events as well, if I can pluck up the courage.
Oh my god.
But I think what I love about this character and about the cover is the way that she's really combined that kind of fierceness and toughness with the femininity, and that's so much of what the book's about, really, being able to be powerful and being able to have conflict and defend yourself and all the rest of it, whilst also being a woman.
Yes, yeah, there's so many of the characters are kick-ass, but we will definitely come back to that. So what can you tell us about Sisters of Sword and Shadow, and where did the idea come from?
So the idea really came from my absolute love of Arthurian legend and of those kind of myths and that whole kind of canon of literature and retellings. And I studied it at university in the original, the Mallory, the Morte d'Arthur. But as a child, I'd read so many of the kind of retellings for children. And it was just such a rich world, you know, within your imagination, the quests and the adventure and the chivalry and the power struggles, and these characters who are so flawed and wonderful and heroic and at the same time very human. And it's just the most incredible space for men. That, you know, you've got Arthur and Lancelot and Galahad and Percival and Bedivere and Pellinor and Gaheris and Gareth and Gawain, and you could just go on and on, Sir Kay and Sir Lamorak, and then you've basically got Guinevere and Morgan Le Fay. So you kind of either the witch, the bitch, or the love interest for the guys to fight over, or kind of at a stretch you get to be the Lady of the Lake and just pop up and give the men a couple of weapons. You know, it's just not great for women. So it was always about wanting to reimagine that world and that richness and that adventure and power, but through a feminist lens. And I'm such a huge fan of all the kind of retellings that have been happening recently, Madeline Miller's and Natalie Haynes, and it's such an exciting time. And the great thing about this period is that we really don't know very much. You know, the best source material that we have really is kind of in the 800s, and this story is taking place kind of at the end of the 5th century, early 6th century. So who's to say that there weren't a bunch of women riding around in armour and using swords, and the only reason we haven't heard about them is because actually all the men that they defeated never told a soul about it.
I love that idea that, you know, they always say obviously the winners write the history, right? So
exactly.
It's just like, well, we'll just leave that bit out.
Yes.
So that will be fine. And I think what's great at the moment, especially Arthurian legends, are having a little bit of a moment. So one of the other interviews we did earlier this year for Gwen and Art are not in love.
By Lex Croucher, which is amazing. Yes, that brilliant.
Book. So it's kind of great to see Arthurian legends now, kind of more people wanting to know about it and doing the research and kind of asking those questions. So if there was anyone else kind of or any particular period of history that you would like to kind of cover in a through a fancy lens, what do you think you would like to write?
I'm fascinated by the witch trials and that whole period of history, particularly in Scotland, where there were so many more witch trials than there were in England, and the death toll was much higher, and it was really a kind of hysteria. And I think that's a slightly forgotten area of history, and even when we do revisit it, we don't necessarily kind of even recognise the reality of what was going on. It's really common for people even now to say, you know, and 3,000 witches were burned. Yes. They weren't. 3,000 women were burned. Yes. And that's quite, I think that's a really fascinating period to discover, mainly because the misogyny that was inherent of so much that was going on there remains in our society today. And I think for me that's always the fascination about historical periods, looking at what has but also what hasn't changed.
It's obviously so interesting you say that, because in every kind of, I suppose, realm of society, and just thinking about even, for example, in publishing, say, it was a lot of kind of the old male guard for many years, and now there's some great female editors like working their way up the ranks, and it's just great to see. So more of these stories are kind of coming to the fore.
Definitely, and actually that's what I love about fantasy, is that it's so kind of female driven, and there's so many kind of unapologetically feminist fantasy heroines, which is great to see.
Yes. Oh my god. Yeah. Oh yeah. It's a wonderful time to be writing or buying books.
Definitely. So true.
So what came kind of first for you? Was it kind of, I want to write in this time period, or was it kind of, did any of the characters come kind of fully formed, kicking their way through?
Yeah, some of them did, I think. I mean, it was very much about the Arthurian myths in that period. But I knew from the beginning that I didn't want to do a straight retelling. I didn't want to do like a gender-swapped Knights of the Round Table. And the main character in the book, Cass, is quite naive, quite sheltered. She's kind of been brought up in a quite rural area on a farm, and her older sister is being married off, and she knows that she'll be next. But she has a chance encounter with a character who did, I think, kind of just burst into my head fully formed. There's a very mysterious, incredible, powerful, brave woman on the back of a horse who kind of appears, explodes into Cass's life, and essentially pulls her up behind her on her horse and gallops off with her, and off they go. But also Angharad, who is the woman who kind of sort of convenes the Sisterhood of Knights that Cass then discovers, who is a widow who had an abusive husband, and when he dies she pretends that he's still alive in order to retain autonomy in a time when really women were very much kind of chattel to their husbands, and if people knew that her husband had died, it would have made her really vulnerable to the local kind of nobles who would have quite liked to sort of absorb her lands by taking over and by marrying her. So she creates this incredible safe haven kind of refuge within her manor for all of these kind of girls, misfits, young women from across the country who found their way there after finding a life that didn't fit them elsewhere for various different reasons. And she was always a really special character for me as well, that idea of kind of wanting to be a protector, and the idea of sisterhood and building a world that looks the way you want it to within a world that doesn't. And also that idea of intergenerational feminism was really important to me, that idea of older women guiding and teaching younger women I thought was really special.
There is something about those kind of opening chapters that really kind of set the scene. So I heard about this book and asked to be sent a copy, and then I was just like, I'll start reading it on the tube, and it's like,
oh, so
this is great.
Thank you.
So it is phenomenal. How did you manage to kind of keep that pace? Because there's no kind of, though the character can be, there's some quiet moments as it were, but there's still such a pace to the story.
Well, I think there was a lot going on. There was a lot that I wanted to get into it, and I like the idea of the pace of the book reflecting how it feels to be this young woman thrown into this breathtaking but sort of slightly terrifying but also exhilarating world. You know, getting on the back of a horse for the first time, holding a sword for the first time, discovering this quite mind-blowing reality that exists that she could never have dreamed of, and then discovering about external forces that are conspiring to threaten it, and finding ways that they can kind of fight for for themselves but also for others who are in vulnerable positions. And I think naturally the story is quite pacey because there is so much going on, but I wanted the reader to have that same kind of experience that Cass has, which is that it is quite fast and breathless, and you almost can't quite catch your breath and take in what's happening.
It's like obviously from the get-go, kind of the whole idea of this almost like secret society almost, and all these just very kick-ass women. This is incredible. How does your writing process differ, other than I suppose there's obvious ways it would differ from non-fiction to fiction, but how do you kind of go about planning when you're kind of doing a non-fiction book versus fiction fantasy type thing?
So I think non-fiction is easier for me because I know exactly what's going to be in it, and it doesn't go off in unruly directions and sort of explode in ways that you hadn't expected. I know what non-fiction, I know what will be in each chapter, and I know that if I sit down to write chapter 6, whether it's on a Wednesday lunchtime or a Saturday late at night, the same material will come out, and that will be what the chapter looks like. Whereas with fiction, in a way that is both kind of exhilarating and terrifying, I have a much vaguer outline, and then things happen that are kind of almost beyond my control. Or, I know that if I sit down in a particular mood, to write with, before dawn, or if I sit down in the middle of a busy rainy Tuesday, what could come out will be completely different. And that feels kind of amazing and exciting, but also quite sort of unruly and quite difficult to kind of wrestle. So I think with fiction it feels like more of one of those, those little slidey puzzles. Yeah. And sometimes I'll find something that has to change and it will be brilliant, but then it puts all the rest of the puzzle out of order and I have to go back and change everything else to try and make it fit. So it's just it feels totally different to me. And also in terms of the messaging with non-fiction, there's a very clear message and you're really trying to change people's minds, or you're really trying to persuade them of your particular kind of urgent viewpoint. Whereas I think with fiction it's really important not to do that, because a reader of fiction doesn't want to be told what to think. It's not the point. They want to really enjoy themselves. They want a really good story, and hopefully as a kind of side part of that process they will be thinking about and exploring and challenging some kind of ideas in the world around us. But if they're not coming to their own conclusions, then there's no point. You might as well be writing non-fiction. So that was really important to me.
And I think there's an interesting idea in this book, but also obviously in the Everyday Sexism campaign, for example, of sisterhood, and whether it's in kind of obviously real everyday life, or whether it's in a book that you've picked up to kind of enjoy and while some time away. So how important is the sisterhood?
So important. I mean, it really runs through everything I do. The power of collective voice, how much stronger we are when we stand together, when we speak out together. And there's just a million different ways to express and explore that, which I think is so important. And also about finding yourself within a sisterhood. One of the things that for me has always been the most moving about everyday sexism is that when people share their stories, they become part of a community and they become held, and there is something about the catharsis of sharing your story amongst people who believe you. And the power of that is just massive. The power of finding yourself in a collection of people who are your people and who will hold you and support you. And I think especially for young women, especially for teenage girls, for me there is this kind of thing I always kept coming back to around armour, because I feel that the young women I see and work with in my work, they are strapping on metaphorical armour every day, to walk down the street, to be online, to go to school. They really are. And I kind of like that idea of a group of women saying, we are strapping on our armour too, and we will fight alongside you, and you're not alone.
Yeah, it is incredible. I think I kind of inadvertently, so a few years back I set up an industry book club. And I was just like, it's going to be like editors and agents and stuff can come along and talk about sci-fi and fantasy. And I set it up with my friend Rachel, who works at Harper Voyager now. And we opened it up to everyone. But for whatever reason, no guys decided to join us. So it's now like, I think we're over 30 members. But
Cool.
it's all women of different ages, different parts of their career and stuff. And it's just great that you can kind of sit down and vent a bit. So yeah, the importance of sisterhood is very important. So to kind of round off our interview today, so what are you working on next?
Well, I am working on the sequel because this is part one of a duology. And for the first book, I learned to joust and I learned to sword fight. So at the moment, it's not really a spoiler, but it tells you a little glimpse into the second book. I'm learning how to do horseback archery, which is going to be the particular skill that the main character masters in the second book. And actually just training and learning all of the minutiae of those different skills was absolutely exhilarating and brilliant, and hopefully provides a kind of burst of feminist escapism, which is what I hope this book will be for readers.
So you're all ready for war.
Yeah, don't mess with me.
And to finish off, so what are you currently reading, watching, and if you game, what are you playing currently?
So I am currently reading the second of the Fourth Wing series, Iron Flame, which has just come out at the time of recording, and is equally as kind of page turning as the last one, which is very exciting. And at the moment, unfortunately, I'm living in such a tiny flat that all of my gaming stuff is in storage. I know it's really very upsetting.
Oh no!
So I'm not currently gaming, but I'm waiting to get it back again.
I'm ready to pick it back up. There is a game I've started recently, Octopath Traveler 2, which came out earlier this year, and it has a very, there's a few amazing characters, but there's this one amazing female assassin called Throné, and her storyline is like straight out of a fancy. I love it. So amazing. Yeah, if you get
that will be top of my list.
It's good. Well, good luck with getting you need more space for gaming.
I know, totally. I have been enjoying The Last of Us, the TV adaptation, which feels adjacant to, but obviously not the same. But actually that is brilliant. So well done, I think, the adaptation.
Kicking off that spore-based horror genre. You should do a sporer next.
You know, how can I make that feminist? I'll work on it.
You'll find a way.
Yeah. It's a great idea, thanks.
But thank you, Laura, for joining us today and for signing all these copies of your book.
Thank you so much for having me.
So excited. And yes, there'll be signed copies going to all of our stores and available to buy on our website. So click on the links and you'll be able to get yourself a signed copy. But yes, we'll see you next time for more FPTV. Bye.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.